Good morning from the Brussels studio of the EU Pavillion at COP27. My name is Christine Möller. I'm working for the European Commission and I warmly welcome everyone connected to our online session, Optimizing Climate and Food Action. The climate urgency has highlighted the need for food and climate actors to come together, to maximize existing opportunities. And this is exactly what we will be doing in our session today. Notably, we will be discussing how climate resiliency and food systems is key to obtaining food security for the most vulnerable populations and highlight interlinkages between SDG 2 on food security, ending hunger and malnutrition, and SDG 13 on climate action. While this session focuses on global impact opportunities, as they rise from the Climate Resilient Food Systems Alliance, a second session following after a 30-minute break on this session will complement the discussion by highlighting an innovative implementation case of building climate resilient food systems. Hence, it becomes clear that we've programmed a session tandem on optimizing climate and food action. Now, in the coming 60 minutes, we want to shed light on how the three Rome-based agencies, the World Food Programme, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the International Fund on Agricultural Development see their role in the Climate Resilient Food Systems Alliance, and what the needs of three partner countries, namely Fiji, Gambia, and Pakistan are when it comes to climate resilient food systems. For this purpose, we have set up two discussion panels, each panel hosting three distinguished discussants. The first panel will feature the Rome-based agencies, while the second panel is reserved for country evidence. Now, I would like to turn to our first speaker on the first discussion panel. It is Dr. Martin Frick. Dr. Frick has been director of the World Food Programme, Global Office Germany in Berlin since 2021. Previously, he served as Deputy Special Envoy for the Food Systems Summit, Senior Director of the UNFCCC Secretariat and Climate Director of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, amongst other positions. Dr. Frick, it's a pleasure to have you with us. My question to you is the following. The Climate Resilient Food Systems Alliance was born out of the 2021 UN Food Systems Summit. Could you elaborate why this initiative is so important at this point in time and how it is different compared to the multitude of coalitions we are witnessing?
Well, thank you very much. I'm coming in a bit at a short notice, so if you would tell me how much time I have for my intervention.
You have 8 minutes to be precise, but you can also add a minute if it's convenient for you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much indeed. And you mentioned in your moderation that I'm with the World Food Programme now for 1 year and served as the deputy to Agnes Kalibata before. And as many of you know, the Food System Summit was actually intended to endorse 12 coalitions that would really reflect the most important needs when we are speaking about food system transformation. This coalition on resilient food systems is one of them. So you can actually call them the inner core of the coalitions coming out of the Food System Summit. And that has a very good reason. You know, we spoke about broken food systems in the Food System Summit for almost 2 years, and often we were asked, so what do you mean with broken food system? And we were doing that in the midst of COVID, and COVID has certainly shown us how supply chains are not a given, how those people who work in food systems typically have the worst jobs on the planet and the worst paid jobs in the planet. And so it's not surprising how many people were affected by COVID in the early stages working in food system. But globally, it has shown us the vulnerability of our food systems, by supply chains not being there anymore, but now the long COVID of economies, if I can call it this way, is that COVID costed about $23 trillion in value that was destroyed by COVID. And as a consequence of it, we have many economies who are exhausted after COVID, which is reflected in a debt crisis, which is reflected in devaluating currencies worldwide. So as a consequence of that, you have 67 countries worldwide with food inflation over 15%, a very strong dollar, and high prices on the commodity markets, not least because of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine that has brought the prices up. So if you are dependent from imports, you're in a double whammy. Your own currency is not worth much. It's devaluating all the time. Inflation is a reality in some places, to a point that people buy bread in the morning because it's more expensive in the afternoon, and you got high prices to be factored in dollars. Now, this is not going away. People are speaking about relaxing prices as the absolute spike is over, but we are still way above last year's level. And if you compare world market prices to 2019, it's quite obvious that this trend of lacking affordability of food is continuing. All of this is, and you have noticed it, without climate change. I haven't said a word about climate change yet. And still, in a deeply unsecure world, the one thing we know for certain is that global warming will continue. We have been ignoring and we have not been doing the right thing for 27 years. And while we speak in Sharm-el-Sheikh, emissions are still rising. So there seems to be a cognitive dissonance between what we are discussing at the COP and what's happening in the real world. We know one thing for certain, and this is it will impact food security. It will impact people on the ground. And we need to do whatever we can to build food security from the ground up. Now I'm working for WFP. WFP is a humanitarian organization, but it's also building resilience. And while, of course, we are going around and talking to governments and receiving money for humanitarian aid, it's absolutely clear that with the numbers going up as they were the last 3 years, and just as a reminder, 2019, 135 million people being acutely food insecure. Today, it's 349, so more than 1 billion people being acutely food insecure. With these numbers, no humanitarian aid in the world will be enough. So we need to build resilience from the bottom up. And this is very much a political story as much as it is a development story. Because what needs to be done is not complicated. It is diversifying food systems. It's going away from our dependency on 3 crops only for 60% of our calories. It's revitalizing what has been there. Lentils in India, millet in sub-Saharan Africa, and embed that diversity of food in a biodiverse environment, in building up nature capital, in building up soils, in building up water tables, so that we brace for the impact of climate change, but we also address so many issues at the same time that's helping resilience, not only in terms of food security, but also resilience, for example, against terrorism. Because people are not joining many of these extremist organizations because they think that their political ideology is convincing. They join because it's the only way to make a living, and we have to change that. So I'm hoping, and I'm seeing actually, a COP in which food systems and resilient food systems are playing a significant role, which is new. Many good people have been pushing for that for a very long time. And we finally see that there is a recognition that all these interconnected crises, from political destabilization in the Sahel to loss of biodiversity in the Amazon, are indeed interconnected. My last sentence, and I want to leave you with that, is the impact on food systems, the soaring numbers of hunger, of course, are a result of many things interdependent that don't work. But if we look at resilient food systems as a desired outcome, we're actually getting a lens and a tool that helps us navigating these troubled and complex and complicated matters. And I hope that this recognition is there in the COP, that we need to get our different national plans together, and food systems is a lens to integrate the nationally determined contributions, the adaptation plans, the national food security plans. All of that need to come into one coherent strategy. It's a lot of work, but it can be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Frick, for having highlighted why it is important to have integrated food and climate action, and also having underlined that the Climate Resilient Food Systems Alliance is part of the inner core of coalitions as they came out of the Food System Summit. I would like now to introduce our second speaker on the first panel, which is Mrs. Sylvie Wabbes. Mrs. Wabbes is a resilience advisor in the Emergency and Resilience Office of the Food and Agriculture Organization. She has worked for more than 15 years with FAO. She is an agronomist from the University of Louvain-la-Neuve in Belgium, with more than 30 years of professional experience in development, humanitarian, climate, and environmental management. Mrs. Wabbes, we've heard that FAO, together with a number of UN and non-UN organizations, is a core member for the Climate Resilient Food Systems Alliance. Could you tell us more of the role FAO plays within the Alliance, and how does this link up to important FAO milestones, such as your recent strategy on climate change and the launch of FAST a few days ago? Thank you.
Many thanks for welcoming me so nicely in this panel, and it's my pleasure and honor to speak after Martin, who has been really a champion in putting food system on the political agenda. And we can see during the UN Food System Summit in 2021, and we can see in this COP where we are sitting at the moment that the agri-food system is being discussed in many, many different fora. It has a lot of attention, and this is already quite a great outcome from this UN Food System Summit and our action all together. So thank you very much for that. I would just like, as FAO, we are working very closely with WFP and IFAD, also being here at sisters agencies, because food and agriculture is really part of our mandate. It's part of our role. And what the key motto we have for the FAO work in this COP is, and from previous one, is really putting the agri-food system at the center of the main solution to address the climate crisis. And agriculture, especially being a climate-dependent activity, the connection between the agri-food system, which we talk really from production to processing, distribution, consumption, and disposal. The role of climate is so important, and it is one of the main driver of hunger. We know hunger from the global report on against food crisis, on food crisis. The latest is that we have at least 205 million people in severe acute food insecurity situation. And that the agri-food system, like Martin was saying, is failing to deliver, especially for those people on the front line and suffering from the effects and the threats from climate change. And climate change needs to be unpacked, and we're doing that as part of the FAO climate change strategy, but as part of the UN Food System Alliance, the Climate Resilient Food System. Alliance, which is really one of the 3 resilience alliance coming out of the UN Food System Summit. And we're really looking at the climate extreme events and climate slow onset events. The extreme events are what we talk about climate-related disasters, mainly drought, flood, and storms, which are highly impacting agriculture and food security. But slow onset events, which is more temperature change in seasonal rainfall pattern, sea level rise, it's more these gradual changes, but they are also impacting the agri-food system, especially on the production level. We count today that the climate-related disasters are absorbing about 26% of the total economic loss and damage and loss in the UNDRR terminology. And if you look at drought alone, and we see this very well in the current dramatic situation in the Horn of Africa, drought alone is absorbing 80% of the total economic cost of the disasters. So it is a very climate impacts, climate-driven extreme events are extremely expensive events if we're not working together to prevent, anticipate, and better adapt to the risks and these impacts. And that's really at the heart of the work of FAO and its partner, and it's at the center of the Climate Resilient Food System Alliance also. We also, another important number is that we have to look at 2.5 billion people roughly have agriculture-based livelihoods, especially in the southern, in the global south. We have countries with more than 80% of the people with agriculture and food-based livelihoods. And if we look at the entire agri-food system, we estimate there's probably 4 billion people. So you can see why transforming the agri-food system in inclusive, low carbon, resilient, and sustainable system is at the heart of the solution for climate change, but also addressing of the inequity and the non-sustainability elements that we face today. The also important point to remember is that these smallholders, especially small-scale farmers, fisher, herder, tree dwelling communities, they are producing about 80% of the food supplied in the developing countries. This is huge. And this, at the same time, these are the people who are suffering the most from the impacts of climate change. At the same time, they are the custodian of our precious renewable natural resources. So they are the guardians of biodiversity and ecosystem functions in terms of water, pollination, and other services. So we are in this double crisis where those smallholders, which are responsible for the precious food and renewable, depending on renewable natural resources, are also the one on the front line of the climate change, the least supported and the most affected. And this is where these initiatives, the Climate Resilient Food System Alliance, but also the FAO climate change strategy, which has 3 pillars, global, national, and local level, for delivering a suite of solutions, a suite of action on mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. This is really essential that we work all together and at scale for bringing not only knowledge, understanding of all these suite of risks, capacities, innovation, and funding that reach the last miles, funding that reach out to those communities who are really the climate hero of the society and especially of the agri-food system, because they are dealing with all these different threats and disasters and stresses that really is making their job extremely difficult. So what we are recommending in this constellation of multiple risks and the cascading climate crisis together with biodiversity crisis, pollution crisis, health crisis, and now also the impact from the crisis in Ukraine, we are advocating for a shared narrative of climate action. Disaster and climate action, as Martin said rightly, we're also having to work on conflict-sensitive measures, not considering climate action alone, but just let's focus on the climate actions. We have today a number of actions that work. Some are being scaled up. So we heard a lot about insurance, climate risk insurance, and many others needs to be brought together. Another one we hear a lot about is a nature-based solution. But we need to put all these suite of actions together, going from the climate risk governance with the policies and tools, together with the field support at the farm and firm level to manage all these climate risks in terms of lowering the carbon. You know that the agri-food system, it can offer a very big sink for the emission in terms of the soil and the forest and the ocean. And bringing in also the early warning system, the social protection, the climate proofing of infrastructure, but also working on food loss and waste, and the climate-friendly diets. I think my time is up, but this is what we are suggesting, a radical collaboration together with this alliance and many of the others, including the FAST initiative being launched by the COP presidency now. We are part of this. And the UN Food System and this Resilience Alliance has been contributing to the FAST initiative. And all together to work on this for scaling and reaching those most threatened and vulnerable actors of the food system. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Mrs. Wabbes, for the valuable facts that you've shared with us, and notably the need to put agriculture and food at the center of the solution to the climate challenge. And that is, you have underlined that FAO actually is on the challenge, bundling various actions under its new climate change strategy. Our last speaker now on the first panel is Dr. Sara Savastano. Dr. Savastano is the director of IFAD's Research and Impact Assessment Division. Starting in 2016, Dr. Savastano worked at the World Bank as senior economist with the Development Economic Research Group. From 2008 to 2016, she was an assistant professor of economics and finance at the University of Rome for Tor Vergata. She's the Secretary General of the International Consortium on Applied Bioeconomy Research. Her research focuses on land policies and institutions, rural development, agricultural efficiency and productivity, and technology adoption. She has worked as a consultant with FAO, the World Bank, IFPRI, and other public and private institutions. Dr. Savastano holds a PhD in economics from the University of Rome, Tor Vergata. Dr. Savastano, in the discussion so far, we touched upon the importance of adequate access to finance and enabling mechanisms. In your experience at IFAD, you must have a wealth of research-based evidence on how important it is for the most vulnerable communities to have access to resources. Could you share with us some examples and your vision for the Climate Resilient Food Systems Alliance role moving forward?
Thank you, Christine, for your question. And thank you, colleagues from FAO and WFP for mentioning the evidence that together our sister agency, WHO and UNICEF, have produced out of the SOFI. The SOFI was already a starting point to discuss about the challenge of small-scale producer, about malnutrition, about food security, and about the challenge of climate change. So the Alliance is working together, so let's continue working together as already we did for those important challenges of the world. And indeed, COP27 comes after the IPCC alarming warning that temperatures are rising faster than ever before and will reach even more and exceed the 1.5 targets within the next 20 years, unless together we're able to create bold action right now. IFAD presidents a few days ago at COP27 said that COP is about finance, partnership, results on the ground. And this is our chance to work together for a global green recovery that considers the need of the vulnerable and marginalized people that are at the core of IFAD mandate, the poorest of the poor and the last mile. Almost half of the world's population live in rural areas. Many of them work in the food system to make a living. IFAD focus at COP27 is to highlight the challenges and solutions that small-scale producers, those that are the core of the target of the SDG target 2.3.1, need to face as they produce food to feed a growing population while adapting to the escalating impact of climate change. Climate change poses the greatest threat to small-scale producers, especially those in rural areas. Climate change is changing the intensity and frequency of shocks. Resilience requires a holistic approach that combines adaptation strategies to chronic shocks versus coping strategies for severe and more acute shocks. Those are the main findings of the IFAD 11 Impact Assessment Report, our main publication that allowed to report to our member states the impact that our projects had on beneficiaries. We analyzed closely at the impact of resilience on climate change and found that this trade-off between adaptation strategies to chronic shocks and coping strategies for severe and more acute shocks is fundamental. Therefore, we need to focus on building resilience to shocks and adapting to climate change among those who do not have the resources, speaking about access to resources to finance for resilience. Right now, as my colleagues have already said, climate finance is not accommodating those who do not have resources, the more marginalized and the more vulnerable. We need up to $300 billion a year to help them become climate resilient and sustainable. But as of recently, only $20 billion per year was tracked for agriculture, forestry, and land use. IFAD has been promoting climate adaptation practices through an important program and also its successor, Adaptation for Smallholder Agriculture Program, ASAP, and the ASAP Plus, which is a 100% climate financing mechanism and is aimed at to be the largest fund dedicated to channeling climate finance to small-scale producers. It has a target of mobilizing $500 million, which is expected to benefit more than 10 million people. Between 2019 and 2021, IFAD has invested about $1.2 billion, including co-financing, in climate finance across the developing world. Most of this finance, or about 90%, went to climate adaptation interventions for small-scale producers. At the same time, our evidence base does not give us a full picture of what works and what does not work in climate adaptation. Given the increasing frequency and severity of climate shocks, it is difficult to assess this evidence, and the cost of getting climate investment wrong is high. It leads to a mismatch between where our scarce development investment goes and where we have evidence. There is this evidence gap, and IFAD is thus addressing the knowledge gap, which is an extremely important focus in order to address the finance gap. Policymakers need urgently on ways to achieve the SDG 2-point target of ending hunger by implementing resilient agriculture practice. Development research should therefore prioritize what policymakers and multilateral organizations need to make evidence-based and sound investment. So, IFAD works to close this knowledge gap with the research and impact assessment of climate adaptation project that we finance. The main takeaway from this impact assessment that we conduct to measure adaptation is that improved access to financial resources and technical assistance and the combined effect of the two are essential for our beneficiaries to adapt to climate change and become resilient to shocks such as drought and flooding that are becoming more frequent and severe. So let me give you some example, and this will bring me to the end. In Bolivia, we assess projects to improve capacities to sustainably manage natural resources, land, water, and natural vegetation, and to promote greater financial inclusion at the same time, combination of adaptation practice and promoting support to financial inclusion. These involve increasing investment in adaptation practice like agroforestry, cultivating to climate resistance crop varieties, small-scale irrigation, setting up erosion control mechanism. So, we found that the adoption of these practices, which led to greater on-farm crop diversity, also contributed to 13% increase in gross annual income per capita, which is the main economic goal of IFAD, and at the same time is the target 2.3.1 of the SDG, and 25% increase in ownership of productive assets. Those indicators serve to show that project was not only able to build the resilience, but this resilience is correlated with improved farm production practices and economic mobility. The Alliance. The Alliance is about promoting sustainable, inclusive, and resilient food system in which all food system actors are working together. By working together and stepping up our action now, we can make our producer and food system more resilient to future shocks. As we move forward, resilience will remain one of the main areas of focus of IFAD, which is continuously enhanced by knowledge on the incentives that motivate small-scale producer, agribusiness, rural micro-entrepreneurship to adopt climate resilience practice, and we want to share this evidence with the Alliance. In the future, in the context of climate change and climate resistance food system alliance, this means to work together with partners. And we want to support our partner to feed them with evidence of short-term adaptation need of small-scale producer and promote and identify long-term solution to mitigation. This is a trade-off that exists. This is a trade-off that we need to address. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Savastano. It was very useful to learn about the IFAD research and impact assessment work and to understand the need to both close knowledge gaps, but also financial gaps, and why not in that order. I wanted to move towards a question which I saw in the chat. I would suggest that we take a minute to see what is written there and see whether we can have a response from our panel on this question. The question reads, a plant-based diet significantly reduces greenhouse gas emissions. What more should governments, particularly wealthier Western governments, do to encourage people to eat more plants and less meat and dairy? I think the question goes into that direction. So what are the instruments in the RBA's toolbox available to encourage people to eat in a way that better meets their nutritional needs and in the same time is also good for the planet? Can we have some enlightening response from someone in the panel who's still connected on this question? I think we heard already from Dr. Frick, but also from Dr. Savastano about the opportunities the Rome-based agencies have to support the cultivation of, for example, more protein crops in our agricultural landscapes globally. And eventually we could also have a hint at a demand support program. Is there anyone who would like to intervene? Dr. Savastano, you are still with us.
I feel Christine, I can, if you want, I can answer this question. I can answer this question, I think, I believe, and I hope also on the behalf of the colleagues of FAO and WFP. And because this question raised the problem of nutrition, the importance of nutrition, both of them mentioned the SOFI, the State of the Food Insecurity, which is our joint publication, and which raised on nutrition, and exactly move on, focus on the question that has been posed. What I can tell you is that based on the results of the impact assessment that we conduct in IFAD, we see that the issue of nutrition, because at the end, the question that was in the chat is an issue of behavioral change towards nutritional habit, and how can governments, how can international organizations support this behavioral change, which is not only a behavioral change of individuals, is then the behavioral change also of the economic mechanism that support plant versus non-plant-based dietary needs. So what can be done? First of all, we have to forget that solutions and impact can take place in the short term, because behavioral change is a long-term process and require a combined effect and require really changes in habit, and changes in habit can be introduced little by little. We cannot expect strong and immediate change. It has to be done a little bit at a time, and promoting and supporting programs of projects that can allow behavioral change from the beginning, for example, from the youth. Changing eating habit of the youth is fundamental. Promoting projects, supporting activities that promote better diet is already a first step towards the shift from plant-based, from meat and protein to plant-based diet. So I think that more knowledge and more information is important to be generated in order to design projects that have those components embedded from the beginning. Thank you for your attention.
Many thanks, Dr. Savastano, for having responded so brilliantly to this very important question, also on behalf of all Rome-based agencies. So now I would like to close the first panel, thanking again all three speakers for their contributions. It has shown us how the work of the three Rome-based agencies can very well complement each other, creating an immense value added for sustainable food system change globally. The second panel of our session will discuss evidence from partner countries. The first speaker of the second panel is Dr. Tekini Nakidakida. He is the head of land use research in the Ministry of Agriculture in Fiji. Dr. Nakidakida has an agronomist background and is applying his skill set to improve land use systems in Fiji through sound research and extension support. Dr. Nakidakida, Fiji is one of the countries involved in the work of the Climate Resilient Food Systems Alliance, and is also one of the 4 country case studies which have been launched this year, together with Ethiopia, Belize, the Gambia. Could you tell us more about the key needs to build climate resilient food systems in Fiji, and how the Alliance could come in to support?
Yeah, thank you very much. And Fiji also would like to thank the Climate Resilient Food System Alliance for the opportunity to present in this side event, highlighting the case studies and what has been going on happening on the ground in Fiji. For Fiji, knowing that its geographic location, located in the South Pacific, it is made up of 300 and something islands, with 2 main islands, where the government is situated and which is highly populated. And also it enjoys tropical climate conditions. That means we have only 2 weather seasons throughout the year, and we don't have any extreme winter or extreme summer. In that case, the food systems in Fiji is affected mostly about tropical cyclones and the rising seawater levels from the small islands around Fiji, and also storm surges. And recently, yesterday, we encountered a hailstorm in Fiji, where a tropical country has been receiving hailstorms the whole of yesterday. People collecting ice cubes outside their homes. So that shows the variety or the diversity of disasters faced by climate small island states. So for climate resilient food systems, in relation to climate action, we know that food systems to be climate resilient, it has to be adapted to the impacts of climate change. And we cannot emphasize further that the importance of recognizing the vulnerability of agriculture, the food systems, and the vulnerabilities of the people affected by climate change. So, as a developing country, as a developing small island developing state, there are huge gaps to be narrowed in the food systems in Fiji. To transform food system, we need a holistic approach from government policies and implementation partners, and right down to the farmers who are the main producers of the food. So in a developing state, we know that Fiji has been concentrating on agriculture production a lot. To produce more for food security and for income security, for economic resuscitating of cash flow, especially in the recent case of the pandemic, where everything shut down from tourism and from workers directly related to manufacturing. Everything had to close because markets closed. But people have to feed every day. That's why everybody turns to agriculture to try and create that impact on the food system so that they don't lose out during the pandemic. So there are a lot of gaps appearing in the food systems of small island states, where Fiji is a good example, and that's why we recognize the launching of the case study in Fiji, and we hope that the studies or the result outcomes of this study in Fiji can help small island developing states across the country, across the globe, and also any country within the latitude of Fiji. So food systems are mostly concentrated on production, and there is less concern about how production or how the products are transported and how they are marketed, and how excess food is stored, and how we reduce food waste, how we try and think about our greenhouse gas emissions when we are working along the production and the whole value chain up to where food is stored and marketed. And when food is wasted, we have to understand that we are emitting greenhouse gas emissions to produce food, and then we are wasting food. So how can we close that gap and make food systems more resilient? How can we use excess food, and how can we process them and share them so that it's not wasted. Those are the key gaps in the food systems in Fiji. And going back to the production, we are mostly concentrating on production and not thinking about the nutrition aspect of the food, which boils down again to how food systems is related to our health of the population in Fiji. We know that from the support of the alliance, we really look forward to the outcomes of the case study. We are setting up food gardens in the cities in Fiji, so that it demonstrates to the people that we can have food gardens or backyard gardens in Fiji, in the rural or the urban setting of Fiji. This kind of food production does not only have to be located in the rural, where it is a joint effort, where we have to create sustainable land use measures for all pockets of land that we have. As the head of land use research in Fiji, I've always advised that it doesn't matter what type of land we have, the soil characteristics, the topography, we can put it into good use sustainably, and so that it creates a good, resilient, and food secure system for the country. We have tropical cyclones. We have had a rising number of cyclones, so the frequency increases and the intensity increases. So one big gap as well is the knowledge of the people to be aware of the impacts of any disaster, whether it's cyclone, it's a storm surge, it's a salination from sea water rise, whether it's a landslide, it's a flood. People in Fiji have been through this all their lives, and it's glad to mention here that some of the Fiji population are very resilient. They do not wait for the government intervention to come in. So that is a good sign for people who are aware of what they should be doing to maintain their resilient status. And some communities have had were being helped by developing partners, and we are thankful to the IFAD and the FAO, the international organizations, the non-government organizations who come in time to help build resilience of these communities, and to the regional groups in Fiji from South Pacific Regional Environment Program and the Secretariat of Pacific Communities, who are helping engaging knowledge sharing between countries in the Pacific. So whatever works well in a country can be shared within the Pacific region, and that's how we build resilience as well. So climate resilient food system with climate action is very important, and we recognize the work of the Alliance. And moving forward, we would like to thank again the opportunity to present here in this side event. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nakita Kida, for your presentation on the key needs to build climate resilient food systems in Fiji and how the Alliance could come into support. In the interest of time, I'm moving on quickly to our next speaker, which is Mrs. Fatuja Meturai. Mrs. Turai is the Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture of the Gambia. Mrs. Turai, we just heard from Dr. Nakita Kida on the importance of better integrated food and climate action. Would you say this is the same for the Gambia? What have been your main challenges encountered so far in making the agricultural sector more resilient and sustainable? Could someone in the EU Pavilion in Sharm assist Mrs. Touray with unmuting herself? It should just be a question of ticking an icon. No, we still don't hear you, unfortunately. We're trying to solve the problem. So Mrs. Touray is connected from the EU Pavilion in Sharm, in a studio there. And I'm sure that colleagues are already active to support.
Thank you very much.
Now we hear you. Perfect. Please go ahead.
The Gambia is a small country. It's a small country surrounded by by Senegal, except around the Atlantic Ocean. It is 470 kilometers square, land-wise, and it has abundance of water resources. 118,000 hectares of surface water, and 2 major aquifers with good recharging capacity, with heat potentials to irrigate over 80,000 of lowland ecologies. But with all this, the Gambia, with all these opportunities, the Gambia has to stop. Owing to technical constraints, we are still finding it difficult to strengthen or to fix our food systems due to poor infrastructure, lack of maintenance, and inadequate management skills, as well as physical constraints such as high cost of water extraction, user charges, and inadequate government financing. The Gambia has enormous agricultural resources, has potentials to increase food and nutrition security. But notwithstanding, the food system is faced with a series of challenges on the side of production, processing, marketing, and even consumption. Looking at our production, like in many countries, we depend more on production without looking into productivity and also nutrition, nutritive food crops. That being the case, the Gambia the food system continue to suffer. Looking at our efforts to strengthen our food system, like any other country, we had a UN food system dialogue not long ago, as last year. And through this, inclusive dialogues happened, and a pathway and a roadmap emanated from these dialogues, specifying our gaps and how to pave the way towards implementing this food system pathway to be able to bridge the gaps that are existing. Rebuilding the food system in the Gambia would enable us to feed our population with nutritious meals to avoid or to prevent malnutrition, especially in children. The Gambia food system pathway was costed and was blessed by the cabinet, blessed by the National Assembly, and it is now being shared with donors and development partners and key stakeholders nationally for it to inform our projects and programs that we are to embark on. To strengthen climate resilience food system, we are honored to have the Climate Resilience Food System Alliance on board, who plan to have a case study in our country. And we are hoping that the results of this case study will help to solve the problems that the Gambia is faced with as far as our food system is concerned. We are honored to be part of it, and we are really grateful for the participation at this event. I will stop here for the meantime.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Touray, for having shared the Gambian perspective and also for being so time sensitive. I fear I have to move on to the next speaker without further ado. And this is Mr. Tariq, Mr. Muhammad Irfan Tariq. He is an independent climate change expert and the former Director General in the Ministry of Climate Change in Pakistan. Mr. Tariq, the world witnessed the extraordinary flooding in your country recently, impacting millions of people, forcing displacement, destroying agricultural land, and damaging critical infrastructure, and washing away crop and livestock, the very source of subsistence for the people. How can national and international actors work together to build the resilience of communities in light of these worrying trends, beyond immediate humanitarian actions? Thank you also for being brief in your response. I think we can give the session an additional 5 minutes. We started a bit late. Thanks a lot for giving us the insight from Pakistan.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be part of this side event, and let me start by thanking the Secretariat and the EU for this extraordinary event. Let me also highlight in terms of priority, I think this climate resilient food systems, I would say, would be priority 1 for countries like Pakistan. And before being very specific to your question, let me just try to draw the image of Pakistan in terms of climate checks. Pakistan is a country with multiple ecological systems. You see, it ranges from coastal belts, deep sea, to the second highest point on the planet, which is K2. And in between, we have deserts and plains and rangelands and forests. These multiple ecological systems have their own unique contexts, and they have their own unique sort of challenges and opportunities. Now, within this landscape, during 2022, we had a number of environmental and climate-induced disasters. So to start with, we had the locust attack early this year. Then there was drought. Then the third one was a forest fire in one of the richest pine nuts forest, which destroyed a huge amount of those forest trees. Then there were droughts, glacial lake outburst floods, and then there were the recent disasters, flood, which you just mentioned. So all these multiple disasters, you would imagine, had a direct bearing on food systems. And please remember, Pakistan poses itself as an agricultural economy. Agriculture has a main stake in the economy, where 55% of our population is directly or indirectly employed. Within that context, the agricultural produce is decreasing. There are trends of decrease. 14 to 15% of our wheat crops are reducing because of intense heat. Now, all these disasters, in this context, in the context of these disasters, we would very much welcome the initiatives like climate resilient food security systems and their strategy. I think this strategy for us gives us a range of multiple areas to work in. My initial reaction is that yes, it's very timely, rather a bit late, because you see, Pakistan also has about a substantial amount of its population malnutrition, and we need to produce more agricultural produce because of a huge amount of number of population. Within this context, now this strategy fits in very well, and this is where we have requested a number of foreign agencies and national agencies to support, and one or two major initiatives which I would just like to mention. We are with UNEP's support. We are going into because we produce a lot of rice, and we are going into rice crops which are heat resistant and water efficient. One major aspect of our GHG emissions is the emissions from agriculture and livestock. And please remember, we have fourth or fifth largest livestock in the world, and they produce a lot of methane. Now we are into a number of initiatives like the methane pledge, and other similar initiatives. But what we really need to do is two things. We need to have better housekeeping within our at the national and subnational levels, and we need to alert agencies which are supporting us to get better results, and to be very, very efficient in whatever sort of support we get. The last point which I just wanted to mention is about the strategy. I think I've reviewed the strategy, I've gone through it, and I think it is very, very timely. And what we need to do is pilot different thematic recommendations into areas of their alignment. And I think Pakistan in that particular context offers a unique opportunity to work with the rest of the agencies to develop climate resistant food secure systems. And we would like to welcome everybody who wants to share knowledge and support this initiative. I would thank you very much here and would wait for any questions or clarifications. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Mr. Tariq. At this point in time, I fear we don't have time really for questions. I'm very glad that you concluded your intervention with the invitation to continue the cooperation within the Alliance. Also underlined, as the other speakers did, that the conditions are there in the partner countries to go on, to proceed on the program, on the agenda of the Climate Resilient Food Systems Alliance. I'm very grateful for all insights. I wanted to thank again all speakers, also from the second panel, providing very enriching country views from so different places as Fiji, the Gambia, and Pakistan. The various contributions, both from the first and also from the second panel in our session, allow us, I think, to conclude that the Climate Resilient Food Systems Alliance, also with the strong support of the 3 Rome-based agencies, indeed, has the potential to connect actors, to maximize synergies, and to facilitate and support progress towards resiliency. At this point, special thanks also to our online audience for their interest and attention, and to the EU Pavillion organizers, the technical team, and for this fantastic opportunity of exchange. As said before, please stay tuned for the second session in our tandem on optimizing climate and food action, which will start on this channel at 12:30 Cairo time. Thank you everyone, and goodbye.